All right. I hope everyone enjoyed their break. We are going to be kicking off our next panel, which is discussing the theme of journalism and AI. So often a voice that doesn't get represented, even though they frame the conversations. So we're so happy to have a group of journalists and someone running an independent media organization talking to us about this theme. So take a seat if you can. If you need to step out for bathroom break or food or drinks, feel free to go downstairs. And thanks again for sticking with us during this marathon day.
All right, ready? All right. Hello, hello. Yeah, so we're going to go ahead and jump in, keep this moving quickly. My name is Mike Farrell. I'm the founder of a new nonprofit media company called Compiler. We actually have printed newspapers for everybody. So please grab one and take it with you. But we're not going to talk just about me. I'm curious. I know a lot of people work in media. There are other journalists in the news here as well. I'm curious to see a show of hands who works in journalism and media in some ways. Okay. Yeah. Okay. We'll be calling on you, Michael, a little bit later. Anyways, thanks for your attention. So we've got a great group of panelists here. They all know much more about AI than I do, so they'll be doing most of the talking. To my right is Elodie Viale. Close enough? Yeah. He's done so much. Worked with Penn America. You're a Berkman Klein associate. Affiliate. I'm not ever sure what they're called, but a lot on online abuse and harassment, protecting journalists, and that sort of thing. To her right is Shaquille Hashim, who is the author of Transformer, which broke big news just yesterday about the Paris Summit statement, which we'll talk about. He's also the grants director at Tarbell, which is a really important organization granting funds to journalists to pursue big projects around AI. And next to him is Billy Prigo with Time, who's been covering AI for quite a bit. And so, yeah, we're just going to jump into it, talking about in context. I mean, we're all here on the sidelines of this big, massive summit. I think as we saw from Shaquille's piece, if you haven't read it, you definitely should read it and subscribe to Transformer. And also a little bit underwhelming, I think, in terms of what the statement that was put out and I'm curious to know what, as journalists and how you're covering this event, what you hope that will come out of it, and why we're all here. So Elodie, since you're to my right, you get to go first.
Yes, thank you so much. I'm as journalist, yes, this is I would say a milestone. I'm not really covering the event itself, but I'm here to let's say represent the voices of journalists being at the front line of attacks and facing the collateral damages of let's say this AI new area we are living in. So of course, the main expectation on my side is, and that it has been said several times throughout the previous panels, is to get to our voices heard, listened in this process, and to make sure that communities of users at risk are being involved in the development, in the deployment of AI systems at scale and from scratch.
Yeah, I mean, I think in an ideal world, this summit would be governments coming together to actually take action on some of the challenges that we face as a society. In practice, that is very clearly not what's happening. So for those of you who haven't read it, the leaked statement draft that countries are due to sign on Tuesday basically does absolutely nothing, which is nice. In reality, though, I think this is still a useful event to happen, in part to show the world the inaction of governments. I think that's important for people to see. And also because of events like these side events, I think, are what actually makes this Paris Summit valuable. So many interesting people of society, academia, industry, journalism. And I think these conversations are actually makes this valuable to allow us to come together and figure out how, if governments aren't going to act, what we can do about it.
Yeah, so I was at the Bletchley Park conference, I suppose 18 months ago now, and that was important on its own terms because it was the first time AI had really been discussed at the international level, and that risks had even at that event was minimal at best. Companies kind of made some voluntary commitments, and there was agreement to come back and keep discussing these things. At Seoul, there were some incremental improvements. Companies agreed to give to states, for example, and the lead up and the implication was at Paris, the so-called Action Summit, further action. The implication potentially being that there would be some kind of international agreements to enshrine in law the voluntary commitments that had previously been made. And yeah, if the document that Shaquille revealed turns out to be the final document, I think the summit would be a failure compared to those assumptions. There's still time, and of course, I speak as someone from an American news publication, so the biggest news line for us will obviously be what JD Vance comes out and says. I think that's a real wild card, and it could kind of go either way. So yeah, I guess we'll have to wait and see. Lots can change, but the early signs don't look promising.
Yeah. So speaking of Vance, I mean, where I'm from, Washington D.C. There's a lot going on, to say the least. I mean, we have a new president, Elon Musk, who's doing lots of things. And so I think that, we're in this really perilous moment with not just what's going on with AI, but what's going on with media and trust and perceptions and the spread of mis and disinformation online. I'm curious, like, as this is all swirling around you all, sitting there at your computers as journalists, how do you even choose to, like, what lens are you sort of covering AI through? I think that's would be interesting, because I think you each have a different lens you're sort of seeing this through. And I wonder if you could sort of talk through how you see your role amid the chaos to try to help, your audiences sort of sort through all of this.
Yeah, so when I'm doing journalism, I primarily view myself as writing for an audience of policymakers. That's who most of my subscribers are. And so when I'm thinking about what to cover, I'm mostly doing it through the lens of what do I think is important for policymakers to understand that they might not understand, or that they need to know that they don't know about. Which ends up being very broad, because I think if policymakers want to reckon with the moment we're in right now, they need to understand an awful lot, and they need to know an awful lot. And given the pace that things are moving at, it's very difficult for them. So I think I spend most of my time trying to help them extract some signal from all the noise, I guess. And yeah, try to redirect their focus, because otherwise they're just being led by the lobbyists who are talking to them every day and telling them what is and isn't important. And unsurprisingly, I think those lobbyists are often not giving policymakers quite the accurate impression.
Billy?
Yeah, so by contrast, Time obviously has a more generalist audience. So part of my job is to kind of understand what's happening at a technical level, what all of the tech companies and policymakers are talking about, and then kind of translate that into language that kind of sets the stakes appropriately for the general public to understand, because obviously the public does have a massive stake in this, and ultimately the policymakers are meant to be representing the will of the public anyway, at least in democracies. So yeah, it's hard, and as the world changes increasingly fast, it seems, you kind of need to make your own personal judgments based on what seems to be a real threat on real timelines. And I think increasingly I'm updating to kind of believe and reflect through my reporting that actually the risks that have for a long time been described as long-term, decades away risks might actually not be, and we should probably be taking them a lot more seriously.
Elodie, I know you've done a lot of work on protecting journalists. I mean, how are you thinking about this moment now? I mean, I think we're seeing a lot of harassment toward journalists. I think that's only going to escalate. Combined with AI, it seems like it's a disaster. How are you thinking about it?
Yes, it's a disaster indeed. I was a few days ago at a summit on editorial innovation for journalists in Paris, and we had like 300 francophone journalists in the room talking about AI and stuff. And for the first time, we start having different conversations. Folks who usually just let's say lead the newsroom, work on innovation. Now the topic is like. Okay, how are we going to build our resistance in this system? How and I like the fact that Nikat in the previous panel said people working in authoritarian regimes are used to face these kind of threats, and actually investigative journalists, they are used also to build these networks and these collaborative networks to when they need to face censorship and intimidation. And actually this is where we are now. And because it has been said today, there's a lot of rise of AI related threats, and actually it's more than what we can face right now. Of course, there's a lot of, and maybe I guess that during this discussion we're going to dig into all the opportunities and how AI can also help bridging a digital gap, and maybe help some productivity and stuff. But for now, regarding the current landscape, it's more like yes, a threat, and how do we cope with that, and how do we build this digital resilience and resistance?
Yeah, thanks for that. I mean, let's talk about that a little bit. How newsrooms and media companies are beginning to use AI. I think that there's certainly a lot of experimentation going on. I think a lot of news companies, big companies, would like to reduce headcount with AI. I mean, we've seen that already. I know lots of journalism schools are all focused on not really how to report on AI abuses, but really how to utilize AI and how their students can utilize. So I'm curious to know all of your thoughts on what are the guardrails that should be in place? What are smart ways that journalists are using and should be using AI? And also we can get into how you guys are using it, and how time may even have some guidance around it. So Billy, why don't you jump in?
To my knowledge, we actually don't have any guidance around it. But yeah, I think I probably speak for both of us when I say AI is a useful tool in the journalist's playbook, if you like. I am personally a fan of Claude 3.5. It's a useful tool for not, and I emphasize not, information retrieval. It's not a search engine. It's not helpful for that kind of stuff. If you rely on it for that, you will make an embarrassing mistake and probably get fired. And beyond that, even now that tools like OpenAI's deep research or whatever it's called exist, I would caution against people relying too heavily on things like that. I think that's probably a losing battle. But ultimately, I think the important thing that you need as a journalist is media literacy, knowing where information comes from and knowing how to evaluate what information is reliable, what information is not reliable. And as the world begins to rely more and more on tools like deep research and Claude, you're kind of implicitly trusting the machine gods to tell you truthful information. And maybe it's approaching 90% accuracy, 95% accuracy, but the kind of way that it gets to so-called facts, it's more like it correlates with what facts are rather than causes what facts are. I feel like maybe that's a bad analogy.
Yeah, I mean, could you imagine a future newsroom in which they're mostly filled with AI assistants with just human kind of oversight, producing, which seems terrifying, but that seems to be maybe we're going toward that. How do we guard against that sort of thing?
I could certainly imagine a newsroom this year where junior reporters are given a large language model and told publish 5, 7, 10 stories per day. That becomes possible if you have a model that can basically turn facts into prose while not plagiarizing someone. And the ugly reality of the news industry is like a lot of that is actually how news gets churned out anyway, just by humans rather than by AIs. And that's not good. Junior reporters should be encouraged to go out on their beats, talk to people, write original reporting. And the incentives that are baked into our online social media ecosystem are such that it's more profitable to tell people, go away, rewrite other people's reporting, sensationalize it a little bit and get clicks.
Right.
And so, yes, AI could very feasibly, especially if people at the top of these rooms make bad, short-sighted decisions, lead to journalism times 100. At the same time, I don't think the actual task of reporting, which is convincing people in
Tell you things they don't want to tell you.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's going to remain a human.
AI can't do that yet.
Not yet, and I would struggle to see it happening this year at least. But then people have been wrong about their timelines before.
Shaquille, what are you seeing on this front?
So yeah, I mean, as an independent journalist, I can kind of come up with my own policies for how I want to use AI tools. And I do use them quite extensively. As I think you're alluding to, Claude is really, really useful as a editor. I mean, I'm by myself. I don't have anyone else on my team. Everyone needs an editor. Claude is a free way for me to have one. And I find that very helpful. I also find it really helpful for building applications. I think journalists in general aren't particularly like code literate. I'm certainly not. But it turns out that if you know how to code, you can make all sorts of useful applications to make your life easier. And Claude and other tools now give you the ability to code anything you like. So for instance, for my newsletter, that's typically written by me going through 150 articles a week. It's very slow and long. So I asked Claude to develop an app for me that can take all the tabs I have open, download the text from all those tabs, give all that text back to Claude. Claude summarizes them, and then I can read over the summaries rather than read the full text of each one of those 150 articles, which just makes my whole process much easier. And I couldn't have built that app without AI tools. And I think probably more journalists should be experimenting with using AI tools to develop their own applications. I've talked to some people who use them for like transcription.
Fuzzy search is a really helpful one. Upload a 150-page PDF and be like, what does this say about X that I'm writing about? And if it includes it, it'll tell you the page it's on. If not, then you can carry on, look somewhere else, not waste your time.
Yeah, actually, if we consider all the journalistic supply chain, I would say producing, collecting information, producing, distributing information, AI can be super helpful at every step. And we know that, of course, for productivity, summarizing, and also we've tested among the journalistic community a lot of things for creativity and stuff. I think there will be a rise also of, if I can say so, journalism without the GMO, fair trade journalism certified with no AI. There's a rising trend also in the profession, maybe in the French landscape, on this. And some colleagues, for instance, in Switzerland, test tools based on user needs model. Like if you have one idea of article, you can get 10 out of this idea of this word or this topic, this prompt, you can get 10 ideas if you want to inspire the reader, if you want to alert, if you want to do this or that, and based on the emotional response you want to get in real time from the reader. So a lot of newsrooms are testing very interesting stuff. Now my focus, I used to be a web journalism, we said at this time, lecturer. Now I'm more focusing on protection of journalists. So I would say there's a lot of good stuff in terms of AI tools to protect also from hate speech. I think it has been also said this afternoon, but for journalists, some newsroom, for instance, use, if I can take a French example, France Télévisions, they use the Bodyguard, which is a tool that we can, and we can use it to monitor harassment against journalists in real time, also mitigate this in real time, and get insight of what kind of harassment is it, also to document the cases. So there's a lot of opportunities. I think for all newsroom, what can be very interesting is also to implement some AI principle charter. And my former colleagues from Reporters Without Borders, they published AI principles for newsroom as well, that can also inspire all the newsrooms, all content creators as well, looking for guidelines now.
So just to play devil's advocate here, the more we adopt AI as journalists, aren't we just leading to our own extinction? I mean, you're opening the door sort of wider and wider. I mean, I know journalists now who have basically trained their AI assistants on their entire catalog of work using Claude as well. So I don't know. What do you have to say? I mean, are we on a slippery slope here with the use of AI in media?
I think that's probably more true for a profession like computer science and coding, where you're essentially all you're doing is, well, not to denigrate coding, but turning instructions that your manager has given you into code. Whereas journalism is more you're engaging with inputs from the world, which, by the way, aren't inputs that have trained the large language model, because by its very nature, it's from today or yesterday, and the model has a 6 months previously, it hasn't seen anything. So actually, it can't serve as an edit. It can serve as a sub-editor, which is what Shaquille was talking about, but it can't do the task of creative journalistic thinking or creative editorial thinking, which, as you know, is thinking about what's happened in the recent past and thinking, where does that lead us? What are the criticisms to the things that have just been said? How can we move this forward? How can we show that there are problems with this approach, etc.? Who can we talk to? Who can, call this person an idiot? Like that kind of stuff. Maybe they'll find a way to recursively update these large language models so that they do include those kinds of things. But at the moment, they can't.
And how are you thinking in context of would you do the same with DeepSeek, for instance? And what and how conscious of you are, like, and when you're using AI tools, who's developing them?
I mean, I personally, I don't know. I think a lot of the discussion of DeepSeek has been very misguided and misinformed. If we're talking about misinformation, I think, sure, if you're using DeepSeek via the DeepSeek chat interface, maybe you want to be a bit more careful. We don't know where your chat logs are going, but DeepSeek R1 and V3 is the other one, are both open weight models that can be run anywhere. You can run them yourself on your computer, and if you're doing that, your data isn't going anywhere. And also all of the stuff about the Chinese censorship, when answer questions about Tiananmen Square, none of that applies either if you're running it locally, or using it via Perplexity or one of those other tools, Poe, things like that. So I think there isn't much risk. Mostly I would just encourage journalists to use the best model, which I think is Claude still, but that will almost certainly change.
So if I were reporting a story based on anonymous sourcing at Anthropic, I wouldn't ask Claude to edit that story or tell anything about it, because the information is going to Anthropic servers. Same with ChatGPT, OpenAI, which is why I don't really use GPT. But if I were busy fomenting a rebellion against China, I probably wouldn't use DeepSeek to plan it. So it's kind of like you need to do threat modeling in the same way that you would in terms of browsing the internet. Like, what websites are you visiting as part of your reporting? How can you ensure that the owners of those websites, if they have an incentive to come and get you, can't do that?
Just want to Yeah, I just want to plus one on this. You have to do threat modeling exercise every time you use ChatGPT, DeepSeek, and so on. And this is exactly the kind of advice we provide to journalists and human rights defenders, for instance, when they ask us, what VPN should I use? And every time they don't like the answer because we say, it depends. It depends on who we are, who you are, who are your adversaries, and what are the kind of information you're working on, and what can your adversaries can do against you, and so on. So I wouldn't try to provide a clear answer on that. I would say do the threat model exercise.
So we've got just a couple of minutes left. We won't have time for questions, but we'll be around here afterwards. I mean, there's a lot to talk about. We haven't even really, we're just scratching the surface around AI and journalism, but I do want to end. I gave everyone an assignment to come up with a prediction of how AI is going to change journalism. And if you didn't see that, just, you can make something up on them. But Elodie, you want to go first and then go down the line?
All right. I just gave my prediction. I think there will be a rise of journalism without GMO, without AI, this kind of stuff. But my prediction is it's time to organize the resistance. And journalists, they are at the front line of the attacks, and they've been at the forefront of the front line, I would say, for years. And it has been said previously by Nigat, folks who have been at the front line of these attacks, they know how to deal with that. And I would say it's the same with journalists. We are used to face intimidation, if I can say. We are used to face pressure and legal threats as well. And this is the kind of conversation we've been having also with coalitions of independent tech researchers in the US, civil society organizations. And I feel it's time for all these communities who share values to come together and to say, okay, what can you do? What can I do? Because this is how we fight censorship also as journalists. If you try to do an investigation on your own, it's going to be very complicated when you face pressure. But that's why we build networks of investigative journalists, because then if you want to attack a journalist, you have to attack all the journalists. And these folks like Forbidden Stories and others, they've led this work for years. So I would say it's maybe not what will happen in the future, but a positive thing that could happen is to build all these networks together, and yes, to build this resistance.
Yep. That's great.
I don't know if this is a prediction as much as it is a hope, but what I hope happens in the next year is that the media starts taking AI capability advances much more seriously than it currently does. I think at the moment and I get this because journalists are taught to be skeptical of things. And so when you've got the CEO of AI companies saying we're going to have AI by 2027, journalists are taught to be dismissive of that, and they are skeptical of it. And I think that's fair. But I also think that there's a very good chance that these CEOs might be right. And if they are right, we are not in any way prepared as a society. And we need to get prepared. And I think journalism will play a really important role in raising public awareness about this, motivating policymakers to act. And I guess this is somewhat of a prediction, because I think it's going to become increasingly hard to be skeptical of capability advances. I think even in the past 2 weeks, we've seen models that are incredibly powerful, so much more powerful than anything we've seen before. There are clearly a whole bunch of new models coming out later this year that I think are going to really blow people's minds. And my hope and expectation is that journalists will rise to the occasion.
All right, Billy, you've got the last word.
Yeah, mine was going to be a bit more pessimistic. Sorry. I think it'll get worse for journalism before it gets better, partly based on what I was saying earlier about how the economic pressures on journalism are not great, and the introduction of AI into the newsroom is probably, I would have thought, going to take the form of increasing churn and increasing noise and making it equally difficult. It's not going to help journalists actually do the task of finding new information. But what I would probably end on is, if we survive the next 5 years, it might actually be good for journalism, because in a world of AI slop, where the internet is full of agents that you can't trust, the news organizations that survive will be one of the kind of few places online where you know that you're getting reliable, well-reported material. That's if, by the way, those newsrooms implement their uses of AI in a responsible way and don't make any embarrassing mistakes.
All right. Well, that was pretty pessimistic. Maybe the next panel will bring some hope to the room. Again, thanks for your attention. I do have copies of Compiler. Come get them. Talk to all of us afterwards. And thanks again. Thanks for coming. And thanks, Theo.
Thanks, Mike.